You have this as an acronym, the SIRTA process to achieve this immersive storytelling. We kind of touched upon the first two. Staging, establish that psychological safety prior to the message as a precondition for influence. The immersion piece, craft that message so people's brains identify it as valuable. And then the next one we haven't touched upon quite yet, so maybe you could unpack a little bit more, is relevance. Determine the amount of neural processing really that's devoted to the message.
Right. So there's not one perfect persuasive pitch, story, communication for everybody. It's got to be relevant for that speaker. So really think about what that person cares about the most.
And then the next one we haven't touched upon quite yet, so maybe you could unpack a little bit more, is relevance.
Part of that relevance, as we talked about earlier, is lining up with their personality type. So it's easy for them to process that information. But if you're going to try to sell me diapers, I don't have infants at home, I'm just not relevant to me. It may be a heck of a great story, sales pitch, just not relevant to me. So really, you've got to know that customer or know that colleague. What do they care about? And again, we're back to social connection now. If I know more about you as an individual, then I can craft that narrative so that it's easy for you to understand it and is meaningful to you. So we see in the brain is that when something is relevant to us, we actually apply more processing power to that experience because it's could affect our lives, it's meaningful to us.
Well, the next one is the T, the target. Identify people who will love the message because the likelihood of persuasion is increased by identifying what you call super fans.
Right. So people who are just over the moon excited about this. So again, you can see them behaviorally, but we also can see them neurologically. And oftentimes the neurologic super fans for an experience who are going to not only act on it, but share it. Right. Think of how powerful word of mouth is.
The formula for persuasion is staging, immersion, relevance, target. And then the final piece is action, right? After the message, they need to know that it's urgent that they act upon it.
Exactly. And again, if we look at neurologic immersion data, it's kind of a sine wave. So it's kind of up and down because it's metabolically costly and the brain wants to kind of recover a little bit. You want that call to action to happen at an immersion peak, as you mentioned earlier. But that peak may not be at the end, particularly if you think about storytelling, where I have a narrative arc and I resolve the tension. The peak part of that might be actually at the conflict of the story, and you can actually make the call to action there. So I have looked at neurologic immersion for thousands of ads, Charles, at this point, and so many of them are little story, branding moment, and then call to action. And then by then I've dissipated the immersion. It's too late. So have that branding moment, have that call to action earlier in that conversation. You don't have to finish the entire story. A great example is the movie studios have used our technology a lot. If you look at a movie trailer for listeners, look at a movie trailer, on YouTube or whatever, or the theater, it's half of a narrative arc. Introduce characters, there's a conflict, there's an environment, then something happens, and then what? You got to buy a ticket to find out what happened next. So think about doing sales the same way or any persuasive communication. Hold them, do the call to action when they're most engaged, and then resolve that story with the customer being part of that resolution.